Welcome to the Right Hand Drive Guys podcast, the show for guys who like right-hand drives. We're your hosts. I'm Bobby. This is Aaron.
Yo.
And make sure to follow us on all the socials at RHDGUIS and DM us with any questions you have. We're always more than willing to help. And check out the merch if you have a chance, RHDGUIS.com. We're pretty excited today, actually. Today is our first ever guest and hopefully one of many for the future, but our first ever. Who do we got, man?
Dude, today we got Ryan ZumMallen.
Ryan ZumMallen. Who's this?
Yeah, if you don't know, he is the author of the book, The Cult of GTR.
The Cult of GTR.
So, yeah, dude, this book is sick.
The book is sick.
Yeah, when you first brought it up to me, I just opened a random page of it and immediately just read in a little story about first time visiting TopRank.
Yeah.
And from there on, I was like, holy cow, what else is in this book? So I had to, read it cover to cover.
Yeah,
and,
dig right in.
Dude, I mean, to be honest, this is probably the first book I've read, since high school.
That's dope. I think a lot of guys will agree, give this another 6 months, and I think a lot of guys will say the same.
Yeah. Yeah, for real. I mean, and it's hard to really hold my attention throughout a whole book, but
Right.
I mean, this thing, it's more than just GTRs, really. I mean, he throws in some Japanese history,
Yeah.
Japanese American history. He throws in little excerpts about other cars and other little tidbits about just
And
random
some law stuff, and
Right.
there really is a pretty big spread. And I think with what you're saying about holding attention, just these stories relate to us and a lot of car guys so much that it would almost be hard not to hold your attention with the way that he tells this story.
Yeah, and overall, it's just a great book. And whether, if you're just into JDM cars or, dude, just cars in general, this is a book that would probably hold your attention. And if you have any, what would you say, question about why the GTR is this thing that it is, read the book, and it tells a very good story about this car.
By the end of it, you almost feel not like a GTR know-it-all, but you absolutely feel more educated and have maybe even the slightest bit more respect for the cars, knowing how much they've been through.
Yeah, 100%.
So we had actually tried this, and we had some bad audio. We couldn't tell if it was our Wi-Fi or if it was Ryan's mic, but we ended up doing it again. And so you'll kind of notice our background is a little different. We had to go to one of our offices in order to make sure that we had perfect Wi-Fi and everything was going to work. So we switched up the location for a bit, but what do you say we get into it?
Yeah, let's do it. Episode 58.
Ryan ZumMallen. All right, and welcome back. Today, we got a special guest. I am super excited to introduce Ryan ZumMallen, the author of one of my favorite books, and I'm not just saying that, The Cult of GTR. Hey, Ryan, how you doing today?
I'm doing well, man. Thank you very much for having me.
So for those that don't really know who you are, give us just a little breakdown of who you are, how'd you get into this position, and let's fill them in.
Sure. I've been an automotive journalist for over 10 years now, working at smaller websites mostly, but I was recently at Edmunds for a few years and have written some pretty big pieces for major outlets, done freelance for Road and Track, had big pieces in The Verge, and then a few years ago I started a book publishing company just to give myself a little bit more control over the types of stories that I wanted to go after, and give myself a chance to really sink my teeth into some topics that I wanted to chase. And so I put my first book out in 2019. That's called Slow Car Fast, and it's on millennial car culture and how our tastes and trends are changing car culture as we know it. I should probably update it with the Gen Z version now at this point. They're taking over, but and then my most recent project is Cult of GTR, as you mentioned. And the story of the Skyline GTR has always been one that fascinated me. just hearing like, bits and pieces of the story here and there. And there's so much rumor and there's so much wild speculation about, how things really went down. So I wanted to try my best to see what I could, take those rumors and see what I could prove and verify, and then put it all in one place, to give the diehards something to really enjoy and hopefully give them some new information, but also introduce this story and this phenomenon to people who might not be aware of it at all, because the Skyline mystique is still not widely known because the car just hasn't been here.
Right.
So yeah, that was the goal, to try to capture some of the magic that makes this car and this culture special.
Yeah, I mean, and I was definitely 100% one of those people, even though I own GTRs, to figure out and do the research of, is this rumor true or false? Like, did this really actually happen? Why did MotorX actually shut down? Some of these things, and it's pretty diluted on the internet, whether it's on YouTube or Google or whatever, and it's really hard to decipher what is actual rumor or what is fact. And by reading your book, it really did clear a lot of that up. And I had, and I know Aaron said the same thing, I had multiple moments where I was like, no shit, that's actually what happened. Like, that's wild. And I really think this will be a great tool with all of these, beyond these people, but with all of these new owners that are about to actually take possession of the car. I feel like this book will be an asset. And as you said, to truly understand what this car has been through, since it came out.
Yeah, that was definitely the goal. So I'm glad you had that experience, because I was definitely looking for that oh shit moment.
Yeah. And it's really cool, because where some books will tell you a story and then go on to the next story, I really appreciate how this book will start to tell you a story and then like pique that interest and then come into the next cool story before fully finishing the last one. So you're almost like intertwined with multiple stories at once, and you don't want to stop because the next part of that other story is coming. I really think that was a good strategy on your behalf.
Well, I appreciate that. And I mean, that's how it happened in real time too, right? Like all this stuff was happening. I mean, during the 90s and early 2000s, all this stuff was happening simultaneously. Nissan is still producing the car. It's got this incredible, legendary street racing mystique in Japan. In the US, people are scrambling to get them here legally and illegally. The laws being enforced sometimes in different ways, depending on which jurisdiction is handling it. So all these things are happening all at once. And so I kind of wanted to create that impression that it's all spiraling very quickly.
Right. No, and I for sure got that out of it. Like, I felt like I was in it almost. Like, oh no, what's going to happen with Hero? Is he going to keep spending his money on these weirdo bars or what? That's genuinely how I felt like during the book.
That's dope, man. I'm glad.
So I know Aaron had a question.
Yeah. So I got to ask, why the GTR? It's just a Nissan, right? Why the GTR over a car that, has status, let's say like a Porsche 911 or, something that has history as well? Like, why the GTR?
Yeah, the number of times that I got that question over the course of the research was pretty astounding. Yeah, a lot of people really do view it as just a 30-year-old Nissan.
Right.
And so that proved to me, I thought that there was an opportunity to, introduce this mystique to people, this phenomenon who just aren't aware of it at all, and know the Skyline as a regular sedan or overhyped or just a big motor or, any number of misconceptions. And so there is definitely something unique and special about the GTR. And for me, a lot of it has to do with how important that car is to Japan and its people. It really does represent something more. And that is ultimately why they kept sales almost completely to Japan, to its domestic market. This was a car designed specifically for the Japanese people, by really the most Japanese car company. Nissan, the two words that they combined to make the word Nissan mean Japanese and industry. Like this company and its founder was directly influenced by wanting to build a car company that could compete with Americans, and kind of took blueprints that he learned from American industry in his studies and applied them in order to build a Japanese company that was just as strong as all the others in the world. And the GTR is the ultimate expression of what Nissan tries to be and tries to accomplish. And so, I mean, just that fact right there, just how important it is to the people, I think makes it special. And what they were able to accomplish is like true technological breakthroughs in terms of the four-wheel drive system, the rear steer system, and then obviously the RB26 motor. And to have performance that would blow away cars twice its price or more, that really, really is special. And then on top of that, all the success in motorsports, and it became a phenomenon in video games and films, and created this whirlwind around it that exceeded anything anyone at Nissan ever expected. But I think combine all of that stuff, and it truly is something different from other car stories out there. And there are a lot of cars with great stories, and litigious backgrounds and scandal and all of that.
Right.
But yeah, all of that combined makes the GTR pretty special. And also it's the people associated with it, like the people who really, really care about that car. They're diehards like other cars have, but they're also very welcoming and very down to earth. When you get into the realm of high-end sports car enthusiasts, it's not always a very welcoming, incorporating place.
Yeah,
and
definitely see that.
Yeah, GTR people, in my experience, have definitely been, oh, you're interested in the thing I'm interested? Let me tell you everything there is to know. And that certainly helped a lot.
Yeah, I can attest to that for sure. It's like once like they accept you in, like they're willing to almost do anything for you, and they're willing to bring you along on whatever they're doing. I've been a part of quite a few different car communities in my, let's just say, car career so far, and you would think the GTR community would be more snobby or standoffish, and it's honestly the exact opposite. And I feel like I've been more welcomed through that community than I have, the communities that maybe people would see below that community. They've been harder to like kind of get accepted in than the GTR community. So I can agree, and I think that boils down to the true passion for the car, and the fact that we've all been waiting for it over here for so long that the anticipation has just created this whole different attitude about it.
Totally agree.
What we really wanted to do, because we really did enjoy the book, and so we wanted to ask you a few questions that would maybe just lead you into a story or two that are related to the book, to kind of give some of our listeners a little preview and hopefully, give them the desire to go grab the book. So the question that I had, because I know so few people have had this opportunity, and, to some it may just, seem trivial, but I want to know what it was like having Masa take you through the backside of PDI, where not many people have gone, but I would guarantee almost people would pay to take tours. What was that like for you?
Yeah, to come from a place in the U.S. where there's this, and I visited about a year ago. So, R34 GTRs weren't coming into the country yet. And to come from a place where there's maybe a handful of R34 GTRs and then go to visit a place where they're literally storing them by the dozens. There's more than 50 R34 GTRs in that warehouse. And so to have that door open up and you walk into it, and it's overwhelming to see that many of this highly coveted model altogether. And more than that, to know just how many of them are waiting to come to the U.S. So for those who might not know, those cars at the TopRank facility in Japan are already bought and paid for by outside customers in other countries. So they're just sitting there waiting to become legal to import. And to me, that illustrated the whole story right there, right? Yeah. Like, this car is so desirable that people will buy it in another country and keep it in another country and pay rent on it for the privilege of being able to pay to import it a year or 2 years or 3 years down the line.
Sometimes 6 years. I know some of these guys, it's been a hot minute since
even almost a decade, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, some of the cars in there have been there 6 or 7 years. So yeah, and I figured if I could explain the significance of that warehouse and those cars, then I thought that was the whole book. And as soon as I walked in, I knew, this was going to be good. And the TopRank guys are all great. Masa is, fantastic, just a super warm guy that's just fun to be around and listen to all his stories. His family has an R34 GTR that they bought new, and he says he'll never sell, and I don't blame him. So yeah, it was just, it's just different to be in Japan, as you guys know, and experience the car there on its home turf. It's I think for a lot of people in the community, that's what it's all about. And so I just tried to soak that in.
Yeah, I can't blame you. Masa is quite the character, to say the least. Definitely always entertaining when he is around. Quick little story about him. When we were at the Fuji track day, GTR magazine wanted to feature me in my car, and I don't speak Japanese like that, and so Masa was my translator. And I would answer with a simple 2 or 3, word answer. And he would just go in, and I could just tell, he was fluffing it up for me with all these, special little words that he was using. And so I could tell right there he was a good guy, because he wasn't going to let me go out with just such a short little interview. You know what I mean? So I know Aaron had a good question about the book as well. Go ahead, man.
Yeah. So HKS is one of those tuners that, if you think about JDM cars, you immediately think HKS, right? They're right on the foot of Fuji. They're one of those classic shops, right? Tell us what it was like, meeting Mizuguchi-san and getting the full HKS tour and seeing all their cars, their warehouses, all that. What was that like?
Yeah, another great experience. And, as you mentioned, HKS is built at the foot of Mount Fuji. And so you park at the parking lot kind of at the bottom of the hill. And then as you walk to their office buildings, you're walking up this incline, and it's pointed straight at the mountain.
That's it.
So as you're walking from building to building around the headquarters, you're constantly in the shadow of Mount Fuji, which is just like an incredible arena to be building, one of the world's great aftermarket tuning companies. It's special. You can feel it. It's another one of those things that's like, oh, this could only be in Japan. It's interesting where HKS is at currently. They have such an incredible reputation, and were, true pioneers in the areas of tuning in the aftermarket. I'm pretty sure they produced the first ever bolt-on turbo kit in the 70s.
It's wild.
And look at where that is now. and really dominated a lot of the 80s and 90s too, and helped fuel that passion and that culture and that enthusiasm by figuring out how to unlock cars like the GTR and really, get them to their full potential, which is the whole point. Like these cars stock, they say 276 horsepower because of the federal mandate, but they're fun to drive stock, but
for sure.
the magic that turns these cars into what they've become is when you upgrade them. And HKS played a major, major role in that. Now, where they are now is a little more complicated because there are so many competitors in the area. And, they are not necessarily a leader anymore. There are lots of companies that are trying to make a name and are really innovating. And HKS is kind of sticking to their tried and true method of like moderate increases, smart efficiency. In some areas, they were stressing fuel economy to me, and I was like, I don't know if that's going to play well in the U.S. Like that's just not where people's priorities are. But they have their ways, and it's fascinating to see how they're trying to update that with like modern materials, a lot of use of carbon fiber, a lot of really advanced machining processes. But they have that name, and it comes with a price, but that name means something to people. And so with the GTR, Skyline GTR market expanding here in the US, I think they will definitely play a role, and a significant one. I just think they're up against a lot more competition than they have been in the past. And it'll be interesting to see how they navigate that and try to stay at the top. But as you mentioned, meeting Mizuguchi-san, who's now the chief executive of the company. And remember, this is a giant company.
Oh, yeah.
Like this is not your small tuning shop, in downtown Tokyo with like a one bay door. This is a publicly traded company on Japanese stock exchanges. They have major government contracts. They have all types of applications. They do power sports, jet skis and stuff like that. They do all kinds of stuff. But this is the man at the head of it who built his career, at least in part, on the GTR. He was head of the T002 project, which is a record-setting R33 GTR back in the day, and still talks very fondly about that. But it was really wonderful to meet with him. His office is stunning, and there are orchids everywhere, kind of like lining the inside of his office. And we sat down at a table, and he had, I think, 6 or 7 executives next to him. So that was a bit intimidating, but a very sweet guy and very insightful, you could tell. But yeah, we spoke a lot about history, the history of HKS forming and its mission to provide consumers with excitement, and that's still what they're going for. And to hear it from them, in their office at the base of Mount Fuji, surrounded by orchids, it was again just one of those experiences that I'll cherish for a long time.
Yeah, that's got to be burned in your brain, just, walking in there initially and having everybody sit around the table. I can only imagine my knees would be chattering, and it would just be kind of one of those, like, you got to settle in type things, because, of course, we as enthusiasts have been looking up to what this man has been doing and the company has been doing for so long that, even though he doesn't consider himself any sort of celebrity in our eyes, right, he's the man that's given us so much inspiration and opportunity. So I could only imagine. And it's really crazy to me that, as you say, they're a huge company. They have things like government contracts. Usually when somebody gets into government contracting, all of that little stuff goes to the wayside. And that's really one of the things for HKS that is awesome still, is that, like you said, there's the Skyline markets coming into the US, they have 3 guys, right, dedicated to RBs still. A 25, 30-year-old motor, or an older, and they still have guys dedicated to it. That, to me, that's like pretty wild and shows some dedication.
Correct. Yeah. And the GTR is still a major part of their business, which is interesting because it's a pretty relatively low volume, enthusiast niche sports car. But it's tied with the Toyota 86 in terms of their total sales for first
Crazy.
among all cars on the market. So the cars that they sell, they make the most revenue off of. The entire market is GTR and 86. Two cars that are on completely different opposite ends of the spectrum.
And that's the new 86, right?
I think they're counting, like within the last 10 years.
Oh yeah, wow.
But
which is crazy to think that a 30-year-old car is tying in accessory sales to, right, whatever 8 or 9-year-old car. That definitely speaks volumes just about those GTR enthusiasts as we talk about.
Yeah, and I think they're counting R35 also. But yeah. The entire lineage, pretty impressive.
So, I can't even imagine, I wouldn't know, but the process to create a book, especially to this level, I can only imagine is a long process that is tedious and sometimes feels directionless. And, I can only imagine, your job is definitely one that takes a lot of focus. And so what I was curious about was, what was the most interesting or intriguing knowledge that you gained during this book process? Because as you said, you didn't know all this before you started the book. So what would you say was that, one kind of story or bit of knowledge that just kind of blew you away?
I think understanding more about the history of Japan and Japanese and U.S. relations, and how those things really do influence decisions that are made today still. There was so much that I didn't know about Japanese history that I feel like should be better understood. And maybe I'm just speaking for myself, but the fact that Japan was a closed off culture for centuries until the 1850s, when the U.S. essentially barged into Tokyo Bay and said, "You're going to trade with us now," because we just brought in our 4 biggest warships and pointed them at your coast, and you're going to open up your country for the first time in hundreds of years and trade with us. And I'm oversimplifying it a little bit, but that is something that is not regularly taught in U.S. schools, but it is still very much emphasized in Japanese schools today. That is a very important watershed moment for them as a culture. And here we just aren't really aware of it. Yeah. But that kind of set in motion a long and complicated history of relation between our two countries. And in a lot of ways, it produced unintended consequences, like, us kind of forcing them to adopt more modern society led to Japan becoming the second largest economy in the world at one point, with a market cap that exceeded the US's at one point, which is astonishing. And not to mention, World War II and, us being on opposite sides. And after the war ended, the US occupied Japan for years, and they went through a brutal period of reconstruction. They had a phrase at that time, because there was hunger, starvation, real hardship, and their phrase was "endure the unendurable," which is unthinkable but it was kind of a rallying cry, a call to arms for them to collectively get through this period together. And conditions that were like they say, almost unendurable. And I think that speaks to a cohesiveness in their society that that is really unique and special. And as they tried to build up from that, the role of their car companies was enormous. And so there is so much pride in a company like Nissan. Same with Toyota, Honda, and other similar ones. But there is so much pride in the products that they produce, and trying to compete on a world stage and prove themselves as, equal or better to what everyone else is putting out. And so understanding that is the genesis for where a car like the Skyline GTR comes from, I think was crucial to my understanding of what makes it special.
Yeah, that makes sense. And really, that is something during our first trip to Japan that we really realized, and maybe just being on like the fan of the culture side over here before actually experiencing it, the level of pride that they have for what they do, period. Whether it's the guy sweeping the sidewalk or, the guy building a drift car to go compete, in D1 or whatever, they all have this same amount of like intense pride in what they do. And it really shows. Like, we have a hard time finding cars that don't impress us in one way or another, in the sense of how much pride and like work they put into it. They don't really do anything half-assed, so to speak. And that really stood out to us too, for sure. And I can't remember the word. Albo taught it to us multiple times, but they have a specific word for their pride in the way that they do things over there. That's how like into it and how focused on it they are, is that they have a word just for pretty much not half-assing their stuff. And so I agree. I feel like that pride that was developed through those hardships has really, shined during some of these times when they could have just kept doing anything mediocre, but they chose not to. So lastly, we'd love to hear a little bit about the situation that created, the kind of the end of Motorex, but really the beginning of the 25-year rule. I know you have a little insight on that.
Yeah, sure. So the 25-year importing rule, I'm sure most people listening to this are aware of that, but it hasn't been around forever. It was instituted in the late 80s, and in that period up to that, automakers were getting concerned that it was cheaper for U.S. consumers to buy cars abroad and bring them in to the country rather than buying them through U.S. dealerships. The strength of the dollar made our economy, favorable to that kind of stuff. So they were essentially stealing sales away from U.S. dealerships. So auto companies, particularly Mercedes, but it wasn't just them. They got several others involved, and to make it like a group effort, tried to institute a law to prevent that from happening. And what they ultimately came up with was a rule that any car not specifically marketed for sale in the U.S. Had to wait 25 years before it could be brought in. Now, they tried to push a law like that through for years, like almost a decade, and just weren't getting much traction. People didn't really see a lot of sympathy for a group of companies that included Mercedes, BMW, and Porsche. They were kind of like, well, tough shit. But what ultimately changed it was when they were able to make it a safety issue. And that was based on largely on a single episode when an imported gray market Mercedes careened off the road and crashed in Northern California, and a 26-year-old woman was killed. So she was riding passenger. Her fiance was driving. Her fiance had been drinking like throughout the day, and would later fail a breathalyzer test, or I should say a legal limit test. But in the ensuing trial, his attorney was able to convince the jury that his inebriation had little or nothing to do with the accident. Instead, the fact that the Mercedes was brought into the country and then converted by a shop that he said failed to do appropriate work led to a braking failure, and that's what caused the crash. So ultimately, the owner of that car was acquitted, and he's been free ever since. And Mercedes and other car companies were able to point to that case and say, "See, these cars are not safe. They have been tampered with by conversion shops." So they were in an awkward position, right? Because they couldn't say a Mercedes isn't safe.
Right. Of course not. Yeah.
It enabled them to say that conversion shop that you have to take your car to when you bring it into the country, they're shady, and they do shoddy work, and it could lead to tragedy. And the defense attorney in that case literally pointed to each person on the jury and said, "It could have been you. It could have been you. It could have been you." And that resonated with them. So he was acquitted. That gave the car companies the ammunition they needed to, paint this as a safety issue, and that ultimately created the political will to get the law passed in 1988. But yeah, that I didn't know that. I had to go back into records and reportings that were done during the time, and at the time they didn't realize, that it would lead to something like that. They were just reporting on, a trial of a car crash and the tragic death of a young woman. But yeah, again, unintended consequences. And now here we are.
Yeah, and that is crazy. I had always, of course, heard, Mercedes lobbied to have that put in because of, as you said, the increased gray market sales and the decreased localized sales. But to know that what actually set it off was that event in one single event, even though I know there was like a few more where they kind of blamed it that were maybe less tragic, but I did not realize that they pretty much just pinned the shops, which, I mean, we all know some of these specialty shops do cut corners, and maybe that was the case, but yeah, I had never realized that at all. So, I mean, this is just a few tidbits of the expansive knowledge that you can find in the book. And hopefully some of our listeners have kind of realized, like, oh, okay, this isn't just a fact book. Like, this is kind of a, collaboration of stories that really lead up to today almost.
Yeah.
And so let us know. So, where can we find this book? Where, like, if our listeners need to go get a copy right now, they're not going to be able to get a Wangan edition. I'm going to tell them that, because those are sold out, and I was lucky enough to get mine. But there's still plenty of the white cover books, right?
Correct. And the story is the same in both versions, so you're not missing out on the story. But you can find the book at my publishing website. It's carrarabooks.com, CARRARA books. But also the book is sold widely. So if you have a favorite, online retailer, you can find it on most book marketplaces. And, if you request it at your library, libraries are always looking for new titles to stock. So oftentimes if you request it, they'll bring it in there if you'd like to do it that way too.
Wow, yeah, no, that's a great point. No, of course, we always recommend getting it on your website and skipping, the middleman, and that directly supports you, which we're all about. And shout out one more time. It was Slow Car Fast is the first book, right?
Correct.
Yeah, that's the next one on my list. I'm not just saying that. This one got me hooked, but I can't go too heavy on books, But so we definitely,
it's a commitment.
It is, and I don't like to start something and I don't finish, so it really takes me to something. But this was actually really fast to finish, because it really does get you hooked in the sense of, what's the next story? How did these people in Florida end up getting all these cars and get blacklisted? And I need to know. And, I want to know how Hero messed this up, and so these different stories really kept me engaged. And that was why, when we were discussing, well, who do we have on the podcast first for our first guest, it was almost a no-brainer to have Ryan on because of how hooked the book got me. His descriptions of this are really going to be engaging. And so we appreciate you being on here today for sure.
Likewise, man. And thank you guys for this opportunity and for all you do for the culture.
All right, buddy. Until next time, thank you very much. Have a great day.
All right, guys. Take care.
Wow, that was crazy. This guy, Can you just imagine how much research and verification and just traveling and meeting people that this guy did for this one single book?
Yeah.
Dude.
It's insane. Must have been quite a trip, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, the process of writing a book already is just like kind of wild, but like a book like this where it's getting like kind of picked over with a fine-tooth comb because GTR owners don't want misinformation about the car out there. And man, all I've seen is approval for this book from GTR owners that I know from California to Japan.
Yeah. I mean, dude, read the book, and I guarantee you're gonna learn something.
Yeah,
you're definitely gonna learn at least a thing or two.
Yeah, I
it's
totally agree. And I know, find him on Instagram. Again, he gave us the key to where to find the books. Try to buy it directly through him. That's going to give him more of the end dollar, which helps him produce more books.
Yeah.
And yeah, if you have any questions, ask the man. He's super cool.
Yeah, 100%. And check out his other books as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I plan on doing it. For sure.
And I did notice he does a lot of automotive articles for a lot of different websites now that I've been following him and whatnot. So you've probably read something of his and you don't even realize it.
Probably.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so this is episode 58. Our first guest, Ryan ZumMallen, the author of The Cult of GTR. And until next time, I'm Bobby. This is Aaron.
See ya.
Peace.